Max Verstappen is now saying the kind of things that make Formula One uncomfortable, and that is why this story has exploded so fast. Mercedes are winning, Antonelli has taken the early spotlight, and the sport should be celebrating a bold new era. Instead, the biggest driver on the grid is openly questioning where this whole thing is going. Verstappen does not sound like a man reacting to one bad weekend. He sounds like someone who warned people early, got ignored, and is now watching every fear come to life. That is what makes this feel much bigger than normal paddock noise. These rules were sold as the future, cleaner, smarter, and better for the sport. But once the cars hit the track, the mood changed. Drivers stopped talking like this was just a setup challenge. And they started talking like something deeper was wrong with the way these cars race and behave. And that is why this hits so hard. Verstappen is not alone anymore. Norris has raised concerns. Leclerc has shown frustration. Alonso and Sainz have both added weight to the criticism. Even drivers doing well in this new era are not pretending everything feels natural. So before anyone talks about who nailed the rules first, there is one bigger question hanging over the whole grid. What have these new rules actually done to Formula One? The problem becomes clearer the moment you look past the headlines and into how these cars actually work across a lap. On paper, the new package sounds exciting. More advanced power units, more electrical influence, and a new balance between engine power and deployment. But the reality on track feels very different. The driver is no longer just attacking corners and chasing lap time. He is also thinking about when the energy will hit, when it will fade, and what that means for the next straight. That changes the feel of racing in a way many drivers clearly dislike. A great corner used to mean a direct reward. Now that reward can disappear if the energy side is not managed perfectly. In some places, the fastest line is no longer the most natural one. The car starts to feel less like a pure racing machine and more like something the driver has to constantly negotiate with. That is why so many complaints sound similar even when they come from different teams. This is not just about speed, it is about the shape of the racing itself, and once that became clear, the story stopped being about adaptation and started becoming about who had understood this strange new reality first. That is where the whole thing gets politically messy, because Mercedes are not just competitive, they are setting the pace. 3 wins from the opening 3 races completely changed the mood of the debate, when the team benefiting most from the rules is also the team with the least reason to support major change. Every argument becomes more complicated. Suddenly, this is not just a technical discussion, it is a fight over advantage. Antonelli's rise only adds more tension to it. Mercedes can point to results and say they understood the challenge better than everyone else. That gives them a strong position and makes every complaint from rival teams easier to dismiss from the outside. But the story is not that simple. Because even inside a winning package, there are signs that this new era is not fully comfortable or fully convincing. That is what makes Mercedes so important in this story. They are the proof that the rules can be mastered, but they are also the team that turns every possible fix into a political battle. And once the winning side starts admitting that some parts still need work, the argument becomes impossible to ignore. The strongest part of this whole story is that the frustration is not coming from one team, one driver, or one bad result. Verstappen sees a direction he clearly does not trust. Norris has spoken about how artificial the racing feels. Leclerc has shown anger at a system that can punish hard pushing in strange ways. Alonso brings the authority of experience. And Sainz has made it clear this is something drivers want taken seriously. That is what makes the criticism so powerful. These are not all drivers living the same season. Some are fighting at the front, some are chasing, some are adapting, and some are trying to survive a difficult car. Yet they keep arriving at the same feeling. Something about this package does not feel right. When that many different voices line up, the issue stops looking like emotion and starts looking like evidence. Even more telling is that some drivers doing well still do not sound fully relaxed about it. That tells you the discomfort goes beyond pure performance. The issue is not only who is fast and who is slow, it is whether the racing still feels like Formula One in the way the drivers believe it should. What makes this story even stronger is that the public anger came late. By the time fans really started hearing these concerns, people inside the sport were already trying to understand how serious the problem might become. Engineers, teams, and officials were looking at how the cars behaved in traffic, how the energy swings affected straight line running, and how setup choices were changing the racing in ways that did not feel healthy. Some worries were about the show itself, some were about how strange the driving rhythm had become, but some were clearly about what could happen if two cars reached the same point on track with very different energy states and very different speeds. That is where the discussion stopped being just about style and started becoming something heavier. So the key point here is simple. This did not suddenly appear out of nowhere after one dramatic weekend. The fear was already building in the background. The public just did not see it clearly until the sport was finally given a moment it could not explain away. That moment came at Suzuka, and once it happened, the whole debate changed. Bearman's crash did more than shock the paddock. It gave a real image to something drivers had already been uneasy about. Suddenly, the worries around speed differences were no longer theory. They had a real incident attached to them, and that made the entire conversation much harder to control. The most damaging part was not only the crash itself, it was the timing. This happened in the middle of growing complaints about how these cars behave when energy states are not aligned. That is why the reaction felt so immediate. People were not looking at it like some random racing accident. They were looking at it like a warning that had arrived exactly where many feared it would. From that point on, every defense of the rules became weaker, because now the FIA and the teams were not just discussing how the cars feel or how the racing looks. They were being forced to answer whether the risks people talked about earlier were starting to show up for real. Now the fight is about more than what is wrong. It is about who is willing to change it and who gains by slowing the process down. Mercedes have no reason to welcome major changes too quickly. Ferrari are careful because once the door opens, nobody can fully control how far it goes. McLaren have pushed harder on the safety angle because that route is faster and much harder to block. That is why this story has become so tense behind the scenes. The moment safety enters the argument, the usual politics become more dangerous. Teams can debate performance all day. It gets much harder to defend delay when drivers are openly questioning the direction of the sport and the possible consequences of leaving things as they are. And that leaves Formula One in a difficult place. It wants to protect the image of a bold new era, but it also knows the pressure is rising too fast to simply brush off. So the real battle now is not just over rules, it is over how much of the truth the sport is willing to admit. So this is where the season stops being only about lap time and starts becoming about trust. If Formula One reacts quickly and smartly, it can still steady the ship before this story grows even bigger. The championship can return to being about drivers, teams, and who built the best package. But if the response is slow or too soft, then this issue keeps hanging over every race and every result. That matters because the damage would spread everywhere. It would hurt the racing, deepen the divide between teams, and keep pushing Verstappen's warning closer to the center of the season. Once the biggest name in the sport starts sounding unsure about the road ahead, people stop treating this like ordinary frustration. And that is why the next move matters so much. Formula One does not just need better answers. It needs to prove that the people running this sport can still recognize a serious problem before the drivers decide they have seen enough.